Welcome to the Village of Lake Bluff Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals regular meeting on December 18, 2024. Ms. Gable, if we could have call to order and roll call, please.
Yes, I'd like to call to order the Village of Lake Bluff's Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals regular meeting for Wednesday, December 18th, and we'll start with a roll call vote. Member Danley is absent. Member Fisher? Here. Member Miller?
Here.
Member Russell?
Here.
Member Sorensen is also absent. Member Toll?
Here.
And Chair Peters?
Here.
All right, we have a quorum.
All right. Agenda item number 2, non-agenda items and visitors' public comment time. As most of you know, we allocate 15 minutes during this portion of the meeting to allow for any discussion or any issue to be raised that's not on the agenda. If you wish to present, we like to limit it to 3 minutes. And is there anyone present that would like to approach? Seeing none, anybody remote?
If anybody is attending remotely and would like to talk about something not on the agenda, if you can raise your hand. Does not appear so.
All right. Agenda item number 3, Ms. Gable?
The minutes.
Yeah, consideration of the November 2024 meeting minutes. Everybody, I trust, has had an opportunity to review. I think Ms. Fisher circulated some proposed revisions.
She did, and we can make those edits, mostly typos. And then I know that Tom Dobbins, who's in the audience today, had just said that at the bottom of page 6, there's a reference to 3,500 square feet, and that it was saying the entire unit was 3,500 square feet, but that the attic space was 350 square feet, so we can make that edit.
Okay.
And then I had a couple changes on page 2, 1, 2, 3, the 4th paragraph from the bottom, and Claire, I can hand you these
Great.
so you don't have to jot fast. There's text there that references the units are between 900 to 1,000 square feet, and it should be referring to a cost of $900 to $1,000 per square foot. And that's how the price would be based on. Middle of page 3, William Bogus, village residents, suggested that the parking be switched from parallel to diagonal. That would be along East Scranton, not underneath a building or anything like that. Page 5, very bottom paragraph, Mr. Dobbins emphasized that the property is a larger zoning request. Really an appropriate word be a different zoning request than the bank property evaluated. The only other one was on page 8. It said Richard Haig of 202 East Scranton, but that was actually Richard Haig, spelled H-E-G-G, of 625 East Scranton. He lives at 625, not 202.
Yes. We can make those edits.
And then lastly, actually, and most importantly to me, village, in the very last, next to the last sentence on page 9, Village Administrator Irvin noted that the PCZBA will have plenty of time to review the document before it is discussed at a public meeting. There was some text somewhere in there that made it sound like we were still going to publish the draft document before it came back to the PCZBA, and I think several members, I know Chair Peters and myself, definitely felt we should see the document before it gets posted.
Yes.
So I just wanted to make that clear. That's all.
Thank you, Member Russell. Any other proposed changes or other revisions? Hearing none, Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to approve as amended.
Okay, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Agenda item number 4, Ms. Gable, if you want to present that, please.
Yes. On August 21st, 2024, the PCZBA held a public hearing for a luxury automotive storage facility proposed at 105 Albrecht Drive and recommended approval of the final plat of subdivision and 5 variations. After the PCZBA meeting, the applicant decided to move the southern buildings further west to preserve wetlands on the east end, creating the need for an additional variation on the southern part of the property, which has a 75-foot front yard setback. And on November 12th, 2024, the revised plans were presented to the Architectural Board of Review and were ultimately recommended for approval. And the applicant is now seeking approval for the additional variation to reduce the front yard setback for Lot 2 from 75 feet to approximately 61 feet. And the petitioner is in attendance tonight to present their request.
All right. And maybe before we get started, I'll swear you in. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Do.
Who'd like to start? And please state your name and state your address for the record, please.
Sure thing. I'll start by giving a brief overview. Claire, do we have the PowerPoint?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm getting that pulled up right now.
My name is Janet Stengel. My address is 300 South Wacker in Chicago. I am the attorney representing the applicant this evening.
Sorry. There we go.
Great, so it's nice to see you all again. We are back in front of the Plan Commission to request approval of an additional variation for the project proposed at 105 Albrecht Drive. As discussed in August, this is a project proposed to divide the property into 2 lots. Lot 1 is improved with an existing self-storage facility commonly known as Life Storage, and Lot 2 has proposed to be the location of 2 buildings which will house a luxury car storage, self-storage facility. Next slide, please. The requested approval tonight is a variation from the zoning code to allow a 61-foot front yard setback on Lot 2. The code requires a 75-foot front yard setback for zoning districts in an L1 zoning district. Next slide, please. As Clara has already summarized our approval status, in August we were in front of the PCZBA and we received recommendation of approval of 5 variations and a plat of subdivision. We received recommendation of approval from the Architectural Board Review. After this evening, our next step is to work with the village on the final plat of subdivision prior to appearing before the village board. This is a list of the 5 variations that you have previously reviewed and recommended approval for. The side yard in Lot 1, the number of parking spaces in Lot 1, a variation to allow 2 buildings on the proposed Lot 2, a variation to allow the parking spaces in front of the rear building line for both lots, and a variation to allow no screening for the side yard. Next slide, please. This is our revised proposed site plan, which shows the new proposed buildings on the south Lot 2. The configuration is similar to what you have previously reviewed. However, the south building has now been moved west, to accommodate the existing wetlands to the east of the building. Next slide. As you have seen before, to refresh your memory, these are photographs of the existing conditions of the property. This is the north parking lot, which will continue to be used as a parking lot with the proposed project. Next slide, please. Again, this is existing loading areas on the north side of the building. This is the existing parking lot to the south of the building. This is the location of the proposed 2 buildings, which would house the luxury car storage facility. This parking lot is largely unused and is ready for development. Now we have updated renderings since the prior meeting here in front of the PCZBA. These renderings show the fencing and car parking areas in front of each individual space that is available for rent for luxury cars, and the landscaping at the entranceway. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide. We presented these renderings and additional plans to the Architectural Board of Review, which Architectural Board of Review recommended approval with some changes to the blue detailing that you see in this slide. The variation up for approval this evening is a variation to reduce the front yard setback from 75 feet to approximately 61 feet. Shaded in the green is the approximate location of the wetlands to the east of the building. You can see at its closest point, the proposed building and the wetlands are approximately 10 to 15 feet apart from each other. Currently, without the buildings, there's an existing 40-foot buffer around the wetlands. My clients worked with Susan Rowley, who is a wetlands expert, and she submitted an affidavit for the application. Any enhancement plans are possible if needed to mitigate this encroachment onto the wetland buffer area, but keeping 10 to 15 feet between the closest points of the building and the wetlands maintains an average buffer area that is consistent with the Lake Bluff Stormwater Ordinance. This is a hardship due to these wetlands. We want to preserve them. That we realize the location and the closeness of the proximity when undergoing further engineering plans and plans to be prepared for architectural board review. We appreciate the opportunity to come and return to the PCZBA to address an additional variation. I'll now turn it over to the property owner, and they can address any questions and provide additional information.
Thank you.
I'm Mike, and this is John, so we're principals, so we're available to answer any of these questions, but Janet did a good job in explaining why we're here to ask for this additional variance. Once we had the wetlands defined, in order to protect those, we had to slide that south building slightly to the west, and therefore we're at a 61-foot setback instead of the required 75. But it's in line with the building to the north.
Yeah, the north building has a 60-foot setback, so it's in line with that, same, property.
Any questions from the commissioners?
The original building, is that L2 rather than L1? Is that the reason it's different?
The original building
that's the
is
case.
L2. Yeah, is within the L2.
And you're saying that the sight lines will be exactly the same, pretty close?
Correct.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I think it's, I think they're working with a challenging property, so I'm okay with it.
That is right.
Yes, I do see that noted that you were matching the existing southwest corner of the existing building setback along Albrecht with the proposed new setback here, so you're not actually moving any further towards the right-of-way, and it's a very generous setback compared to a lot of the buildings that exist in our industrial park. Also, didn't you actually shorten your building and lose a car
We did.
storage bay or two?
We did,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay,
for the
so the building is
circulation.
in order to make sure you avoid the wetlands.
Right.
Okay, so, yeah, I don't have any problems with the changes.
Thank you, Member Russell.
That was my only question, if the square footage of the building itself was going to be changed, and that was just addressed, so.
Yep.
No other questions or objections?
No, and you had the proper consult from the wetland specialist or hydrologist or however. I had no concerns either. So, any further discussions? Is there a motion? Oh, yeah. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to comment? Or virtually?
Let me just double check. I don't believe. No, it doesn't look like
I
there
can
is.
do a motion.
Okay,
I'll make a motion if,
certainly.
okay. I move to recommend that the village board grant the requested relief in the form of the draft ordinance.
Thank you, Deb.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, if we could have a vote, please, Ms. Cole.
Member Fisher?
Aye.
Member Miller?
Aye.
Member Russell?
Aye.
Member Toll?
Aye.
And Chair Peters?
Aye.
All right, we have, motion has passed.
Next steps for the petitioner?
The next steps would be submitting the final plat and then eventually going to the village board.
Right.
Approval.
Thank you
Well,
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your
Appreciate
support. Thank you.
All right. Agenda item number 5, Ms. Gable.
Yes. Chris Bennett is seeking informal feedback on a potential variation request to construct a 12 by 16 shed, 12-foot by 16-foot shed fully within the 30-foot front yard setback on his property at 400 McLaren Lane. And the zoning regulations do not allow accessory structures in the front yard. And I believe Mr. Bennett is here today, and he's seeking preliminary feedback on this potential request. So if you want to take a step.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bennett. If you could state your name and your address for the record.
Chris Bennett, 400 McLaren Lane.
Thank you.
Not really sure how to proceed, but the location that I want to put the shed is in a setback of sorts because my property over on McLaren is against the open lands, like Bluff open lands. And so I actually have copies, if that would help, of the plat.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up. Just give me 1 second.
So, as you probably know, the original intent was to have the subdivision over West Terrace continue into the wetland area, and that was stopped. And so Park Lane was supposed to continue into the open lands. And my property is right up against where that Park Lane road would have gone. And even though there will never be a road there, the setback is still there. And so the questions I have first off is, I was trying to fill out the form to get the variance. First off, I didn't know if this was a minor variance or otherwise, so I wasn't sure how to proceed on that. And then also, I was wondering if there was any potential to even get rid of the whole setback at all, if that's even a possibility, since there won't ever be a road there, and how, if that was a possibility, how to go about doing that. So that's basically it. I have questions.
Ms. Gable, do you want to address the first?
Yeah, so the first, it would be a major variation just because of the amount that you're, I believe, requesting. I know we don't have exact dimensions, but the fact that you'll be fully located within that front yard setback would be greater than a 25% reduction in the setback. So that would be considered a major variation.
Okay.
And I don't know, Ms. Willetts, do you want to address the second one, or?
For the vacation, or
Yeah, I mean,
Waiver of the
is
right of
there
way or-
any
for the,
need to even have that setback there, since there never will be a road going in there?
I mean, we're bound by the village code as it currently stands, so that would be up to the board.
But that
Okay,
process
so what would be the process to try to get
the-
rid of that?
Yeah, the process would be vacation of that right-of-way.
Right.
Which I know was brought up in the memo, so if anybody wants to comment on kind of their thoughts on that.
I'd like to correct you. I'm not sure that a road will never be built there. There is discussions about developing that property west of you, and that is up for discussion in the future. If somebody wants to buy that property, it's buildable. So saying that Park Avenue
Park Lane.
Park Lane will never be built on is not true. It
Oh, is
could.
Open Lands aware of that? They haven't
Has nothing to
mentioned
do
that
with open lands.
Oh.
This is village property. The
So
open
develop
lands
that particular piece.
Open lands is further west. Am I right?
Yeah,
No.
Elliot, no, if I may, I believe you're incorrect. That whole area back there,
Then I'm in the wrong area.
starting with the applicant's westerly property line, is now part of an Illinois Land and Water Reserve. There's been a formal designation
Oh, okay. I didn't understand.
created, the village applied for that several years ago. So that area is now protected.
You
So-
referring to
Yeah,
the
they just
village-owned
had-
acres that
Yeah.
has come up
The
for
about-
discussion?
No,
Yeah,
not
so
the
that-
tenant, the
well, I'm
take.
just asking, Member Miller, if that's what he's referring
Yes,
to. And
I
that's
am. That's not
further
opposite.
This,
north.
this is further south and west
I stand corrected.
than the other properties.
Okay.
George,
But I know personally, I would not be in favor of vacating those right-of-ways into that property simply to create more yard space for all of the owners that are adjacent to those several right-of-ways that extend. I would prefer, and certainly if it comes up for discussion in the future at the Plan Commission, I would recommend that they remain open space and become part of the Illinois Land and Water Reserve, as opposed to property owners acquiring the property and then possibly fencing
So-
it in or building, shoving all your structures even further. I think it would impinge, we have a wonderful area that's been developed over the last 30 years. And to vacate these, because there's not only your situation, there's several right-of-ways that extend into that property. And I think it would, in my opinion, it would be more beneficial to the village overall that those right-of-ways, if they are vacated, that they would become part of the Land and Water Reserve, and that the vegetation in there remain or be returned to native vegetation as the 30 acres behind you has been returned.
Okay, just for clarification, so I understand what you're saying, there, on the plat, I mean, there's an area that's actually the road, if it, marked as the road, and then there's, my property, right?
Yeah, that whole
What-
area,
that-
that whole
what- that-
60-foot that is shown on the drawing that Claire had up previously is technically a right-of-way, for a public right-of-way.
Right.
It's owned by the village, where a roadway could be constructed and where it was planned to be constructed way back
Right.
in the 1930s.
The part I don't understand is, okay, I see the road part, where, maybe
The
a little
drawing,
path would be put in or something, whatever, who knows? But the part that is actually the little pink line, the
setback line.
the setback line, that's, that part there is my actual property.
correct. And you're
Why
asking
does
for,
that
you're.
part need to be there? I mean,
No,
I see
that-
where the road needs to.
That is part of your yard.
Yeah.
But there is a zoning requirement that no accessory structure can be within 30 feet of what is technically the front yard. And unfortunately, by definition, due to the configuration of your lot and the fact that a right-of-way still exists called Park Lane there, by definition, your proposed structure is proposed to be in the front yard.
Okay,
and
so when you
it's
talk
supposed to
about
be
the
a
right of way, you're talking specifically about the part that's my property?
No.
And not
No,
the road?
Park Lane.
Okay.
On the drawing.
That's
air-
the part I'm getting confused by, is when you say right of way, are you talking about the road or the part that's my property?
The right-of-way is where the road could be located.
Right.
I mean, there's in the front of your house facing out onto McLaren there. That is a 60-foot right-of-way there, but the road is within that right-of-way, and it's only probably like 20 feet wide.
Right.
So the road has been built within the McLaren Lane right-of-way. It just was never constructed within the Park Lane right-of-way. So that area there, Park Lane, it is termed public right-of-way, but it has not been improved with a road.
The road
And-
part, or,
It has not been improved with a road, Park Lane.
right, if it were to be a
Due
road,
south
right.
of your property. So
Right.
by zoning definition, you are not supposed to have a structure an accessory
Right, but it-
structure that close to the right-of-way line.
Would there be a way to get rid of not the road part of it, but the part that's on my property.
Yeah, there would if if the plan commission recommended and then the village board approved
Right.
a vacation of that property to the neighbors on either side. And usually if
Oh,
a
so- okay,
parcel is
so are you saying
vacated,
that to get rid of that part that's on my property, that
it's
the-
not on your property.
To get rid of the setback.
the setback, to get rid of the setback, the city has to
That's,
get rid
no,
of the
that's, no,
land?
no. That's what you're doing here tonight. You're asking for a variation from the setback regulations.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's a way to get rid of that permanently, the setback.
The most straightforward process would be to go through the variation process.
That's why the process exists.
Right.
For lots that are uniquely positioned in the village, your lot is different than your neighbor's because of this right of way.
Okay, so you're basically, no, is what I'm hearing, that
No,
if,
There probably could be other mechanisms developed, but the most straightforward process that has already been laid out is why you were referred here tonight, to seek our opinion of whether or not we would grant a
so
variation.
for the shed, for now, major variation, so I fill it out as a major variation.
Correct.
And then if I ever want to do anything else that goes into that area, come back again for another major variation,
Yeah, that would be
what I'm
correct.
hearing.
That would be correct.
Okay.
Right.
All right, I think that's pretty much it. Is there any issue with the shed that I should know about when I fill this out?
No, I mean, as Clara pointed out at the beginning, the closer you propose to go to your south property line, the more extensive the variation is going to be. And it looks like the way it's drawn, that you're about halfway into that, what's required to be normally 30 feet back from a public right-of-way line. It looks like you're proposing to go about 15 feet. When you come back, you're going to need to identify, staff's going to make you identify specifically where you want to locate it.
Yeah, and it would be, it's a temporary shed. It's the kind that you buy and you drop on,
Matters not.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, so just this draw is something similar to this, just showing exact dimensions. It'll be this far from this property line, this far from this property line, and then details on the shed.
Okay.
I have a question.
And then just one more note before, and I'll finish up. The other members on the plan commission haven't spoken yet about the idea of vacating it, but they may have a completely different opinion as the village board would. But typically also, when an area is vacated like that, you have to pay the fair market value of the land. The village,
Yeah.
it's
that could be
very,
done.
very unlikely that the village would just donate all this land to you. I mean, the village, 25 years ago, perhaps before you lived here, did a land swap and with you so that your backyard is now twice as deep as it was before.
Right.
To provide
Yeah, it's
protection
still-
from the going on.
It's still two lots, actually, yeah,
Right. I mean, that wasn't part of the property 25 years ago.
right.
It was done in a land swap specifically with the purpose of providing you more of a buffer between your private property and the open lands area.
Yeah, well, if it had to be purchased for some amount, that potentially could even be done. I mean, if.
It's possible. Yep. If you want to, you're completely welcome to make that request, but you should probably seek the opinion here of the other three members.
Before even
Before
trying.
you even
Yeah,
try.
Yeah. Well, in speaking with the open lands people, because I see them back there and I talk to them every once in a while, in relation to that property, they did tell me when they were getting rid of all of the buckthorn, right? And I actually went ahead and got rid of all the buckthorn on my property along there as well to kind of help out so it doesn't spread into their, back into their area. They were saying they would like to get rid of the buckthorn in that area there, but they can't. They couldn't use the federal money that they had for the buckthorn removal.
It's outside of the current
It's out of their
boundaries.
property, right. So that's another thing I
The
wouldn't
village
mind
could give
doing.
them permission to go in there and do that.
Right.
Truly. They would probably welcome it. The village.
Yeah, although I'd want to replant something else
But
because
I wouldn't
like
be,
having
I
a
wouldn't
nice
be excited about
separation
the
there.
idea of vacating it and then maybe you, or when you sell the home, the next property owner wants to fence in your whole lot, which you would be totally, as a matter of right, be allowed to do. And then you're boxing off more of what would be open space.
So there's no way to do that vacation process, but then permanently block that
There are many,
little section?
there are many alternatives.
Okay.
That's something you have to decide after you hear.
Okay, does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Two questions for staff or legal. One is, could we recommend to the village board to grant a conditional variance for that setback in the possibility that that becomes a road again, then this variance would then be restricted? Is that a possibility, or would that have to then be like a license agreement or some other tool? And would a license agreement allow him to use the property with the potential for future public use? And then it would rescind the agreement. Just considering, that
Right.
I would not be interested in vacating either, but
I don't think
And
he
it's-
heard your comment, so
okay,
you want
in
to
its
say that
current
again?
form, I think, he has a very valid point that that part of his property, inside his property lines, could be used without having the restriction of that setback, due to the right-of-way that's not currently being used by the public.
So a couple of things. One, to rewind to George, remember Russell's point about the right-of-way. The village did do an inventory, and the Planning Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals many moons ago looked at all the right-of-ways and said, we think the village board should hold on to this one, maybe release partially this one, and went through this huge inventory. The comments about this particular piece weren't very specific to this location in that study. It's about, I guess, a couple decades old now, and that's why we wanted to bring it in front of you for that reason. But I think if staff's opinion was asked, that I think it would be likely similar to what Member Russell said, is that it is highly unlikely that the village staff would recommend relinquishing village ownership of that property, and that the village is working with Labola on developing a plan for access through there, and not necessarily this particular location, but we don't know where the access points are going to be. Based off feedback we've heard from a lot of neighbors, there's a lot more openness than there has been in the past about allowing pathway access to those the open space and the trails back there. So maybe
Oh, there already is.
Yeah, there's informal, but the idea of improving them to a certain level so that people are walking where they should be walking and so forth, and this may be a location chosen. So it is unlikely, as Member Russell stated, that the village staff would recommend relinquishing control of that. I think if I understood your question, Mr. Toll, about you referring to the owner's property, not the village property. The village would only license use of its own property. This,
Correct, yes.
Yeah,
So that would be separate from the conditional variance, right? So if the village does decide to build that road, then we would want the shed removed, right? So,
yeah, and I think that would be, if the village, I think you can place that condition on it. You could, and the village board would ultimately decide if that's a reasonable condition and make a determination on that. But then you would be at risk if the road did. I think it'd be very minimal risk because I think it's highly unlikely.
For the shed, I
Yeah.
wouldn't care, because as I said,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
one of the kinds where it's just
Yeah.
got a steel bottom, you drop it on top,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah,
If I were to do house improvements and extend the house, obviously that would be a whole other thing.
yeah,
But for the shed,
right.
it's not a big deal.
I think you're, again, as Member Russell pointed out, I think the procedures in the code have been designed for situations just like this, and that's why the variation process has been established, because your lot is unique, and that you can come in and make a request for a variation to make use of this property, which ordinarily is not made use of because most structures aren't allowed as of right, and there's accessory, like fences and so forth, but bigger structures like this typically aren't allowed in visible locations like this in the front yard. So I think you're at very low risk if that was a condition that was, but even still, I don't know that that's a condition that would come up tonight. You know, the idea that this is not.
Well, even with what you're saying, though, I mean, if we can say there's not going to be a road, like an
Right.
actual road,
Yep.
which
Highly unlikely, yep.
if there's like literally just going to be a path, then why do you need the setback at that point?
And again, that's based off a set of rules that apply to multiple properties like yours that are residential, detached, single-family homes, that are established to be a tool to manage where structures go and don't go, and that the village can't prescribe boutique, setbacks for every property, because in the big unit, as was talked about earlier, originally the subdivision was supposed to continue westward, right?
Right.
And then all that would make sense and why it would apply, but it didn't, and here we are. So there's a handful of lots that are sitting in a unique position because those subdivisions were never completed.
So I guess my comment, I kind of joined my two comments for the conditional variance, but in the absence of a vacation, if he does want to use the right-of-way for some reason, and would be interested in, we're not interested in vacating it, but he's interested in using it, then that would be a license agreement.
That would be a different
you could
instrument
go
that the
through
board, the
another
village
process.
board, not this body, would
Right.
consider if there was something, but I'm not aware
But
of.
that shouldn't be necessary for a shed, I would think.
Unless you wanted to put it on the village property, but again, it's not what you're asking tonight. You're asking to put it in your
Right,
front yard of your lot.
right. Yeah, I have no interest in the village property whatsoever.
Okay.
Although if it made it easier, I could
I
find
don't
the
think
money.
it makes it much more complicated.
I could find the money to buy it if it were easier.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, it's much more
I
complicated.
don't normally
of
have
a
money for
process.
that kind of thing, but for that kind of thing, I can summon it.
I think this is a very simple request to come in and ask for a variation to place this shed here. Yeah.
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah, Deb.
So can that setback area be fenced out to the roadway? I mean, if, for instance, you wanted to fence your,
It already is fenced.
out to the,
To the property line?
My property line has a fence on it already.
okay, so it's not, the
And I-
setback
and I-
doesn't.
and
The good news,
impact
the answer is yes.
Yeah, and
Lawfully, it can be.
And I already
Okay, good.
mow the
Yeah.
grass on the other side of the
I didn't
fence.
remember where, I drove by it, but I didn't remember where the fence was. Okay, thanks.
So
Yeah,
certain
so-
improvements in that are allowed,
Right.
and it's outlined in the code.
Right, that's what I
Yeah.
thought, but just wanted to check.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if we're asking other people on the board, I wouldn't necessarily be in favor of vacating the easement just for all the reasons that have been talked about. I think the more opportunity we have to hold on to roadway easements or whatever until we know what we're doing with them, makes sense to hold them.
In the shed location?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a problem with the shed location as long as it doesn't sound like it's a terribly permanent thing. If you came and said, I want to expand my house into the setback line, that I think is a different question or something, so.
Yeah, I would echo the other commissioners' comments. I'm opposed to the village contemplating a waiver or relinquishment of the Park Lane right-of-way, so I think we stay away from that as a general recommendation. The shed itself, it's extenuating circumstances, so I think as long as you keep the shed approximately where you're showing it to be right now, I don't have a real problem with that.
What's the reason that you can't push it further north?
So I actually had a permit to put the shed directly to the west of the house, and was moving along on that. And then after all of the the buckthorn was removed, we suddenly realized we had a nice view. And so we're like, oh, maybe a shed right in front of our view there is not such a great idea. The other idea, the other place I could have put it would be on the other corner. My neighbor, who wanted to be here tonight but couldn't be, he wouldn't be happy about that. It would be kind of an eyesore for him as well, looking back. On this corner, you can't see it, but that area where the shed is, it's actually between several trees. It's kind of not very visible. So it's kind of an ideal situation where it's between a bunch of trees, and there will be even more trees next year after I plant them, so that's why.
So you could come here and ask for a variance, correct?
Right.
And based on the discussions here, it doesn't sound like there's gonna be that much opposition just for a variance, knowing that it could potentially be forced to remove, which wouldn't be a burden. So I think you should go that route if this is what you want to do.
And it's a major variance, so good to know.
And what's the proposed height?
I think the walls are 8 feet or something. I'm not really sure what the exact height is, but it's a standard shed. It's not they sell two kinds. It's not the barn style. It's just the regular roof.
Flat roof.
Yeah.
Good. Any other questions?
No, that's it. I will proceed with the filling out of the forms.
Great.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Bennett.
That's it.
George, I have a question. Where does the open lands begin off of that street? I mean, how far is
Can you pull up the aerial, clarify the whole?
Can't.
Green Bay to what streets? I don't say that again.
'Cause
Up by is it Thornwood and Burkdale and up further north, I think? 'Cause I get,
if Clara can pull up the aerial, it would be a better than, because it's sort of an odd-shaped
right.
So,
area back there.
I can see.
is it easier,
And
the
even
one with
zoom.
the streets?
Maybe even what you just have there with the structures and just back out of that view.
This one here? Or would you,
And just even back out much further, because the the whole,
maybe not that far.
so, and even back out one further. If I may, I'll just go up and point for Elliot's.
My own edification.
Oh,
That's a little too far. Yeah, unfortunately, this is
what
the
jumps,
next, yeah, it jumps quite a bit.
So that's McLaren Lane at the end there, right?
so this is McLaren.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the property in question is all of this, and then extends up behind, here's the water plant here. So it
Okay.
extends up beyond to the west side of the water plant. This is the 10 acres, that is a completely different,
Oh,
and
okay.
that's not part of the,
I see. Okay, I was mistaken. That's the one that they can build back there.
Right.
I see.
Up by Thornwood and Burkdale, I think.
Thank you, George.
Yeah, thank you, George.
There is a map back there, you don't realize. I can't read it.
Impossible.
Yes, yes.
I blew it up and you can't read it.
Okay. Agenda item number 6, Ms. Gable, if you could
Yes.
introduce that, please.
Tom Dobbins, architect, along with property owners Jason and Courtney Trombley, have returned to ask for some more pre-application feedback on a potential multifamily building with up to 4 units proposed on the vacant lot and parking lot at the northwest corner of Evanston Avenue and Scranton Avenue. The property is currently zoned R4, single-family residence district, and a number of changes have been made to their plans since the last PCZBA meeting. And Tom Dobbins is here to present on this potential project.
Yeah, and before Mr. Dobbins gets started, I just wanted to state, for the record, so to speak, that we're dealing with an informal discussion. There is no formal petition or formal pleading or formal presentation. It's just an informal discussion. It's beneficial to the PCZBA, it's beneficial to the public. And nothing will occur tonight. Before anything formal would occur, we'd have to have a formal petition and then a public hearing. So we're not having a public hearing, it's just an informal discussion.
Okay,
Mr. Dobbins, if you could state your name for the record and your address, and then please proceed.
sure. Tom Dobbins, 403 Evanston Avenue. So what you're seeing here is the cover sheet. That is a new 3-dimensional image that we'll talk about a little farther into the presentation. Next slide. So the project description, which is the next slide, no reason to dwell on that at all, except for maybe a portion of the first sentence. Why are we here? We're looking for zoning relief for the property at 570 Evanston from a single family to a planned mixed-unit development. Next slide. Okay. What have we done since we were last here? Okay, we carefully considered the feedback that you guys gave us, and we conducted some additional due diligence. Redesigned the building to respond to the feedback and further thoughts, which we'll talk about in more detail further in the presentation. We talked with all the adjacent neighbors, including supportive and opposed. So as we talked about at the last meeting, I talked to Lee, and I talked to Gene, and had a conversation with Mark Stolzenberger as well, and of course the neighbors to the east and the south. Some of them are here, and we investigated the history of Block 3 in more detail, and we'll touch on whatever is relevant for purposes of tonight on that. And what we also want to do is, I want to read this because it's important. We continued our commitment to pursue the optimum development solution for the corner lots. We understand the importance of this corner and its opportunity for a positive impact to the community. Okay, so just because some people are opposed to the project, I don't want their perception that we're trying to ramrod some solution through. We're trying to build and design the biggest building we can to make the most amount of money. We understand this is an important corner. We understand in some ways it's the gateway as you head from downtown to the lake. So we're committed to doing the right thing. We solicited feedback because we really wanted to hear what people thought. We don't have full agreement, and you're going to hear about that later tonight, I am certain of that, but we gave it the old college try, as they say. Okay, next slide. All right. Stating the obvious. You probably don't see a slide called stating the obvious very often in this arena, so I'm going to read it. If you believe the corner lot should be used for multifamily, as most of us do in this room, whether the multifamily housing style is a duplex, 3 townhouses, a Altunian Whitmer style building, or what we're proposing tonight, zoning relief must be granted. So at the core of what we're asking for tonight is your support for a text amendment, narrowly written, so there is no way that it can be used on some other property. That's what we're looking for tonight. There are other issues we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about scale and bulk and height and third floors and all those sorts of things. But at the core, none of those matter if you don't support multifamily on this particular piece of property. The last meeting, you heard me say at least 2 or 3 times, if you don't support multifamily and we can't get there, there's nothing more to talk about. Because we are counting on the village support for multifamily on this particular property. The appearance of the variances should be a secondary consideration, which means that the multifamily has to kind of drive the first decision on how we best proceed and what you guys think. Next slide. What are we trying to achieve tonight? Well, we want to reconfirm some of the things as quickly as possible, assuming we heard it right the last time, what you guys said about an integrated Block 3 solution, having multifamily on the entire block and so forth. We want to put to rest the notion that the village cannot and should not put multifamily on this corner. There has been some opposition communication suggesting that is the fact. We don't believe that's the fact. You heard Drew in the last meeting say otherwise. You heard Clara cite the comprehensive plan. So we just want to make sure that we've got that clear understanding on that. And then the last item on this is we want to determine if it is recommended to move to a formal PCZBA application. That is our next step. You probably don't have 2 workshops on the same project very often, but here we are a second time. Our next step is to go away or to file a formal application. And to do that, we obviously need a pretty good indication of your support on the multifamily at a minimum, and hopefully some pretty strong feedback one way or another on the style of building that we're proposing. Okay? Why are we here now? Okay, so we are here now mostly because the bank property building is heading toward approval. That circumstance causes certain things to be happening on the Trombley property, okay? So we are here partially to react to that. We are here partially because I think the Plan Commission in the village has a unique opportunity to help design that entire block, help support a design on that entire block in a unified manner. So for instance, if there are things about the development that we are proposing or you envision that could impact backwards the bank building proposal, then this would be a good opportunity to talk about those in concert instead of one after another. So I think that is important. You've seen many developments over the last 10 years that included the entire block. Even though these are two separate parcels, we're still proposing multifamily for the entire block, and it should be coordinated and integrated. That's our belief. Okay, next slide. Takeaways from the first workshop. So this is important. If we didn't hear the feedback right, then there's no way we can react to it. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on this. Block 3 should be an integrated development with transitional multifamily housing. That's what we took away. The Village of Lake Bluff supports multifamily on the two corner lots currently zoned single family. Okay? Comprehensive plan supports multifamily on Block 3. That's what Clara read and said in the last meeting. Corner lot is not required to be green space, nor is it likely to remain green space. You're going to hear a lot about green space and that comprehensive plan today. Optica's middle missing housing recommendation. For those of you who don't know, Optica is a consultant hired by the village to help them determine the optimum use for certain parcels in the community. Block 3 happens to be one of them. They include the corner lot as multifamily in their recommendations. The sought-after zoning relief is a text amendment. That is what the village is recommending, allowing a planned mixed-use development on the corner lots, and the text amendment can be worded to avoid precedent-setting relief for other properties. I'm just repeating what I was told. I am not a lawyer, but I'm assuming if that's what we hear in this environment, that can happen. The bank building will likely get approved with a height variance from 35 feet from 30 feet. And it's going to get a variance for a third floor. Make no bones about it, it may be a penthouse, but it is a third floor. So the two-story law that has been talked about and everybody was so proud of at 2 stories and 30 feet is no longer in place. The likelihood is that that variance is going to be granted. I think everybody would agree with that based on what we've seen. The neighbors directly to the north support the bank building project and the bank building project, and they do not support our project. Okay? You heard Lee and Jean, who you'll probably hear from tonight, say that. Neighbors across the street to the south and east support the corner property, and you're going to hear from some of them today. Okay, next. Some relevant facts. I won't talk about all of these. I talked the last time. Our property is 43% of the block, way bigger than it would be perceived as you drive by or walk by. It is almost half of the entire block, okay? The corner property's been used for a commercial parking lot for 30 or 40 years. George, you may know the background. I don't know if anybody does, but I suspect there was a gentleman's agreement at some time to put a commercial parking lot on a single-family lot.
Don't know.
But probably. So these lots have not been normal single-family lots, frankly, for a long, long time. I mean, there obviously been overflow bank parking for a long time, and now there's a couple cars parked on it. There's been 3 multifamily proposals on the entire block over the last 10 years. So there's clearly been evidence that a multifamily solution, corner to corner, Oak to Evanston, has been seriously considered. There's been a lot of pushback on scale and height, but there hasn't been much conversation about the fact that multifamily isn't allowed on the corner. That seems to be a new subject. Our proposed building uses the attic space to access the roof deck, but it is a 3rd level. We said that last time. Bank property has a setback, and I want to, you'll see some exhibits of this, but this still really surprises me. The bank property when the PMD comes into effect, has a setback on the north side of 18 feet. On the Tromley side, the east side, it's only 10 feet. Both are single-family adjacent properties. That is categorically inequitable. Why that is, I suspect that whenever somebody wrote those rules, they always assumed that the Trombley Corner was not going to be a single family, that in some way was going to be mixed use, going to be multifamily, but that 18 and 10 foot just doesn't frankly make sense given the fact that they're both single family on both sides. Projected sales. Now, this is something I didn't talk about a lot last time, but it goes to the property value aspect. The projected sales prices for our condominiums are going to be about $750 a square foot. I can barely get those numbers out because they are so high. $2 to $2.5 million per unit. The Altunian project is going to sell for $900 to $1,000 a square foot. Those will sell for $2.5 to $3.5 million. Quite a bit more than what the neighborhood already has in terms of property values. We revised the design and we're saving the trees and made the building shorter with underground parking. You're going to see examples of that. Neighbors to the north would not support, this is Lee and Jean, would not support an Altunian-style building on the corner. Okay, I had talked to them about that when we had our conversation. Neighbors to the north are not necessarily impacted the most from the proposed development. Okay? The neighbors to the south and the east are impacted just as much or arguably more in some cases. So it isn't always the loudest voice that is the correct answer. That's what you are here to judge some of that. We collected a petition of over 150 signatures of support for our project. Within those 150 signatures, the Morawskis, the Reeses, Paul Lemieux, and the Kluchkas all signed that. They are the neighbors directly to the east and the south. Okay, next slide. How do we know the village supports multifamily? I'm not even going to read this. I think these are all things we talked about less, but I'll say just one thing. If the village didn't think that we could get this done, I don't know why they would be wasting any of our time here. It can be done. Whether it should be done is up for you guys to decide. Next slide. Okay, so this is quite a bit smaller than I was hoping for, but the exhibit on the left is an exhibit that you may see again tonight. This exhibit is as part of the plan, a comprehensive plan of Lake Bluff. It should look familiar to everybody. It's something that Drew and Clara put up at the last meeting. So there's some sections of this, 3 and 9 in particular, that we'll talk more about tonight. But the interesting thing here is I've never in my 35, 40 years of practicing, this exhibit is going to be referenced by us, and it's going to be referenced by the people opposing it. Using the exact same exhibit, somehow there seems to be some confusion as to what the village wants on this. So I'm hoping this can be clarified. But we are assuming that item 3 on this is that the village wants multifamily on block 3, and that the corner green space is frankly an outdated portion of this exhibit that does not reflect village current thought, and the fact that it says the mature stand of trees should remain on a private piece of property just seems outdated. If it was a public piece of property, it's fine. But we'll address that in a little more detail. But this was the exhibit that the village said supported multifamily. If you could see better, the exhibit on the right, the far right, Claire, can you zoom in? That is a village document that shows multifamily across the whole piece of property. So I don't really think there should be much doubt that the village supports multifamily on the entire block. Next slide. One more.
Yep, sorry.
So this, again, is quite small, but this is this information was presented as recent as March 7th, 2024. This is the Optica presentation suggesting how Block 3 could be developed with multifamily. If you could see it a little better, the one on the left would be lower density, and the one on the right would be higher density. The one on the left shows, it's hard to determine exactly where the property lines would break because they treated the entire block together. But the one on the left, low density, there's at least 3 units shown on the corner lot and probably a piece of the U-shaped building. And on the high density, there is 7 units shown. So clearly, Optica thinks that a size building that we were proposing wouldn't be a bad idea, and I suspect the village, having seen in fact, probably some of you sat through this presentation and assumed that this was a generally correct direction. Next slide. So the next slide is some photographs of existing conditions. So the top 2 are standing in the bank proper parking lot looking back at Lee's house. You got a pretty good view there, especially in the winter because those are mostly deciduous trees, but there's a pretty good view right where they're going to be building the new bank building property, the Eltunian building. This would be the view kind of back toward that. The one on the upper left is farther back. The one on the upper right is much closer. The one on the bottom is a view of what it would look like from the back of the building we're proposing. You can see the parking lot and some cars that the Tromleys parked there, but you can see the back of our building is going to be looking at the tall arborvitae, the mature arborvitae that Lee has in his backyard, and the back of his garage. And I will say, before I forget, and George, maybe you can help with it, there's talk about getting rid of those power lines. Here's an example. It'd be great to get rid of those power lines. We just want to make sure go to the next slide. This is a view of the corner lot and the evergreens that are separating our lot from Gene's lot, those mature evergreens in the photograph to the left. If they put the underground lines through there and they dig those with a trench, those evergreens are going to be gone. It's been very weird. We cannot find any document that suggests there's an easement there, but there's got to be one. Those bushes, those evergreens, shouldn't be destroyed by ComEd. So I think it's a collective effort by everybody's part to keep an eye on that and make sure that doesn't happen. So what I do want to do, I'll walk over here real quickly. So our new proposal, this is a photograph of the corner. Of course, everybody probably recognizes that. It was taken in the summer. So these 3 trees right there, we pushed the building back, so we have a much better chance of saving those. I think there's a very good chance. Even this tree right here, we think we can save. That one's a little closer. And these large evergreens are down here. Our redesign saves those as well. So we've done what I'd like to think is a very good job saving the mature stand of trees that's referred to in the comprehensive plan. Next slide. Okay, just as a quick reference, this is just how the lot is subdivided. You can see the parking lot is on the entire Tromley interior lot that is too small to develop, and it bleeds over into the corner lot. So that's been treated as a commercial property for probably 30 or 40 years. And you can see just how big Tromley's property is based on the whole block. It is almost half of the block. So when we talk about the size of building we're proposing, that's part of the equation you have to evaluate. The lot just doesn't appear that big when you stand on the corner because of the way the bushes work and everything else, but it is a sizable lot. I also showed the trees there that we're now able to save. So that's a big improvement, we think. Next slide. So this is just a reference document. This is from the 2019 information that I called out. It has the heights of all the neighboring houses. And again, are you able to, the one on the right, if you could make that a little bigger, I was hoping that would be big enough to actually see. I'm certainly not going to dwell on this a lot, but it's a frame. Okay, so that's pretty good. So the Eltunian building, the one on the bank property, is to the left there. You can see the footprint takes up most of the site. The penthouse is 35 feet, the third floor that seems likely to get approved. And then the edge of the outside of the building is 30 foot, 4 inches. So the variance, they asked for a variance of 4 inches high on that, and of course, the variance for the 35 feet is a pretty healthy variance. Now, again, we're not saying this is wrong. I mean, the Tromleys could argue very easily that this is hardship on their property, especially since the setback on the west side of the bank property, or on his property, is only 10 feet. So it is causing hardship because you're taking an inequitable condition and actually making it slightly worse, only 4 inches. But the 35-foot high penthouse has a roof deck, so the people on the roof deck can look over into the back of Tromley's backyard, single-family lot as it exists now. They are not opposing it. They're being good neighbors, and they're suggesting that that is a reasonable request, and I don't think I would deny that either. They're setting the penthouse back. They're doing the right thing to get it higher. Now, if you look at our proposed building, the ridge of the roof, and you'll see this more in the design, is 29.5. We changed that. That was 34 last time. We made it under 30 feet because the 30 foot is what the PMD is. You can see the ridge running east-west. That is closest to the northern neighbors is 29.5. We still are proposing a 34-foot ridge that is much closer to Scranton Avenue. You can see how much farther away that is from the northern neighbors just in that diagram, and we've got some other exhibits that'll help you understand that better as well. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the design concept is frankly much as what you saw last time. We're trying to provide single-floor living units for empty nesters with individualized entries and selective roof decks. That has not changed since the last time we were here. What we will talk about is why, one reason the building is oriented the way it is with a slide next. But if you skip down to the bottom, we've got all the residential character. I'm not going to talk about that. Front porches and so forth, pitch roofs, dormers, very different than the bank building in terms of how the appearance works, because we are trying to make it residential looking. We are complying with daylight plane criteria. Now, if we get, well, we have to get a PMD, or there's no reason to be in front of you. When you get a PMD, as you know, there is no daylight plane requirement. We are honoring the daylight plane requirement because we think that's the right thing to do related to neighbors. That is a residential requirement that we are honoring, and I think in some cases doing a very nice job of not overburdening the neighbors to the north. And we made a change to underground parking. That is one reason why the cost of construction has gone up probably since the last time we talked about this. That maintains one curb cut. We think minimizing the curb cuts here, as opposed to a duplex or 3 townhouses where you'd have garages facing the street, you'd have multiple curb cuts. We think that that's a nice feature in this particular design. Next one. Okay, so I'm going to run over and kind of talk about a couple things here. Hopefully everybody can understand. So this is a very simple diagram of how we match up with the bank building. This is what is likely to get approved. That is exactly the footprint that Peter had shown. And the red are the setbacks. So in a PMD, the way the PMD setbacks work, it's 7.5 feet on Scranton. It's 10 feet over here on Oak, 18 feet in the back, and here is this 10-foot setback instead of 18 on the Tromley property. I really have no explanation for that. I think everybody in this room would be a little surprised at that because they're both single family. The reason that this isn't being talked about so much is because there isn't a house here. So it's harder to visualize how overbearing that would be because there's not a house there, as opposed to the neighbors on the north where there's a house, and it's easier to visualize why a 30-foot, 4-inch high wall against a residential zoned property, single family, can be overbearing. And you'll see the ramifications of that. So when we get a PMD, these are our same setbacks. Those setbacks are too small. We would never propose a building there. We are pushed it back a little here, We're double the setback along Evanston. We're a little bigger here, 3 feet, and we're a couple feet bigger over here. But what I want you to also look at, we think it's an important design feature from planning to finish off the block as though our building has a relationship to the bank building because it looks like it's gonna get approved. So we think it's a good idea to generally align the facade along Scranton. We think that that's a worthy objective. We think that kind of aligning it on the backside is also a good planning idea. The setback here is about the same as what the bank building property is. And over here, we've got a 20 or 21 foot setback, depending on the map, double, well, that's a typical front yard setback in residential. So we think that's pretty good. Double what the PMD requires, and a pretty good distance more than the neighbors, Lemieux's and Jean's house, which are 12 or 15 feet. So we are 20 foot back. By doing all of this, we can save these trees, probably. We still have to keep our fingers crossed, but we're 5 feet farther back. This tree is pretty far back, and we're very confident of those evergreens because they're a little less temperamental than the oaks. So that is our overall kind of design concept on why the footprint is what it is. Okay? Next slide. Design revisions. So we put underground parking in lieu of on-grade garages. You know, George, you talked a lot about getting more room over there, and we heard a lot about from the neighbors that they didn't like the garages facing their property. I think they were right, so we listened to them. We think it's an important idea to save those evergreens, those mature evergreens. If you remember the photograph, they are very mature evergreens. They provide screening from Jean's property to ours, but frankly, they provide screening from our property so we don't look at their garage. So that was one of the benefits of going to underground parking. We eliminated the driveway. Those are they go hand in hand. We're preserving those trees, evergreens on the north property line, which we talked about. We've got the larger setbacks. We moved it from 15 feet to 20 feet. So those oaks, those 3 high-quality oaks, are way more likely to survive. The roof ridge has been reduced under 30 feet, except at the one ridge that's up near Scranton Avenue, because we still would like to use the attic to access roof decks facing Scranton. We made the front yard setback 13 feet instead of 11. So the overall building got smaller, again, generally aligned with the Eltunian building, but it is a little farther back to give a little more breathing room from the sidewalk. We scaled down the massing and we revised some of the materials. We think the 3D rendering looks better. I think it looks pretty good. And then I want to point out, so when you look at the rendering, well, let's go to the footnote and I'll look. What's important here, there's probably going to be conversations about the 3rd floor and 34 feet. We're not saying we have to have that. We want that, and we think, given the way we're treating it, it's not a big ask. But I don't want everybody to get bogged down in that subject before we answer the question about the PMD. Okay? All right, next slide. So this is the rendering. Okay, as I said last time, I'm not suggesting this is going to win an award, but I think arguably this is transitional by anybody's estimation. It has residential features. It has residential scaling. It has dormers, pitched roofs. It is a big building. I mean, I said it last month and I'll say it now. So we are doing the best we can to take that and make it look like a big house, okay? The neighbors to the east and the south think it's just fine. Lee and Jean do not, and I'm sure you're gonna hear about that. But the reason I wanted to go to this is the garage door on the right side is the garage door to the underground parking. And you would expect to have a big ugly ramp going down to the underground parking. That corner of the lot is maybe 20 inches lower than the Scranton Avenue side. So we're taking advantage of so that rendering isn't quite right. That garage door will be down about a foot or a foot and a half. We're hoping to be able to slope the driveway toward the street from that, which would be a much better solution than once you get in the building, that's where the ramp would be. So you don't actually see, I mean, you see these kind of ramps around town. You will not see that. We did that intentionally because we think aesthetically that's much better. You can see the 3 oaks there that we're saving, and you can kind of see the evergreens in the background to the right that we're saving too. You can see a comparison to the bank building property building. The perspective is a little off there, but you can see the very different design approach from that building to what we're doing, okay? Next slide. All right, so these are some numbers. I worry this will confuse people, but I basically I highlighted the two numbers that I think are worth talking about. The FAR, floor area ratio, which is the ratio of floor area to site area for the bank building, is 1.31. Ours is 0.83. So their FAR is about 58% bigger than ours. So when everybody says our building is so big, it relatively speaking, it is not so big compared to the bank building. Their property is only 32% bigger than our property. So their FAR is 58% bigger, but their property is only 32%. So you can make an argument that what we're asking for is not so out of keeping with what they are planning to do and what could be appropriate on the block. Next slide. Okay, so these are, if you could blow that up a little, Clara, I know I keep asking you to do it. I'm glad you're doing that instead of me. These are some exhibits that tell an important story. So if you could start with start with that one. So this is a schematic cross-section through the bank building and next to Considine's house. So this is, you can see that's exactly the profile of what that building is going to look like. The exterior wall is 30.33 feet high, and it steps down because that forms a railing, and then the penthouse is 35 feet. This at the north side of the building, because the building is set back almost 20 feet, that daylight plane is actually satisfied. So they've done a nice job not overburdening the neighbors to the north, okay? Then go down to the bottom one if you would. This is a profile across, through the building that we are proposing, okay? How hard would it be to go to one of the exhibits that I just gave you at the last minute? Is that hard? This one right here. So this is the same exhibit. I meant to shade in this portion and didn't do it until literally an hour ago. So this is a cross-section through our building. You can see the pitched roofs, the dormers reflected here. Let's start on the right side. So you see the daylight plane. That daylight plane, as most of you know, you come up 12 feet and draw a 45-degree line. That, and you can see where we're placing the house. This would be the relationship between what we're proposing design-wise and Jean's garage, let alone her house. This is very comfortable related to the daylight plane. We think that this is a very reasonable gesture because we would be in a PMD and we wouldn't have to do anything like this if we didn't think it was the right thing to do. So on the north side of the property, I would argue we're not overbearing on the neighbor really at all. The Scranton Avenue side, we're taller. We've got that 34-foot ridge there. The highlighted area is the area that's over 30 feet, a very, very small area. We're doing that to sneak the elevator, which you see dashed, under the ridge so that we can get an elevator up to the roof deck. Making no bones about that. If we have a client that wants to buy that unit, he wants a roof deck and he wants an elevator to the roof deck. We think that's a pretty reasonable way to do it. And then there's a portion of the dormer that's over 30 feet that's actually hidden between the chimney features. So it would not be very obvious. And clearly the neighbors to the south don't think that's so bad. Now, if you could somehow then go back to the slide you left, Claire. Next one more back. Right there. If you could blow up the center. So the center one is an overlay of both. So the red is the Altunian building and the black is the profile of ours.
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify, because I'm pacing through the drawings, the 29.5 foot elevation you're showing for the entire north half or northerly 2/3 of your building is actually
It's a
just
ridge.
a ridge.
Just a ridge.
It's not a flat roof.
That's right, and you'll see that in the next slide. That's right. So, and again, we heard you, 34 feet's too tall. So we went back to the drawing board and made it shorter, and we did it for reasons that, at this stage, floor plan-wise, aren't probably relevant. But you can see, if you compare what Altunian's building is doing related to the neighbors, how tall they are and how close they are to the property line compared to what we're proposing, I would be arguably saying that ours treats the overbearing nature of how tall the wall is close to the property line in a much better manner. Okay, next slide. So the next slide is a little theoretical, but it helps you understand a little, again, Clara, if you could blow that up, I was hoping it would be bigger when it got up here. So the upper one is if we built a single-family house close to the northern property line. You see that in the black where it says B. You could build up to 34 feet tall, as you all know. You could put a walkout roof deck looking out over Lee and Jean's property pretty easily. The red is our outline, and there's no patio or roof deck. There's a grade patio on the north side, but there is no upper patio looking out to the north. At the A side, that would be what you could build on the Scranton Avenue side, and we are basically, with that ridge line, basically matching what a single-family house could be there anyway. So that's a theoretical analysis, but our argument is we think we're doing a pretty nice job trying not to be overburdened on the neighbors. Then if you could go to the next one down. This would be, if you said you cannot have 34 feet. Well, we can do a boxy building as well. I can probably figure out a way to get an elevator up to that roof deck if I make flat roofs on the whole building. I don't think anybody would like that. The appearance wouldn't be what I would be necessarily proud of, but we can do that. And that would be more burdensome on the northern neighbors and probably way less aesthetically desirable along Scranton Avenue. And then if you go to the one below, it's a section looking the other way. So if you could zoom out on this one a little so we can catch the whole, this is looking north. So you see the bank building on the left. You can see how that daylight plane along the western property line of Tromley's property and the eastern property of the bank, how inequitable that is. There is a 30-foot high wall 11 feet from the property line. We could do the same thing if we get a PMD, but we would not do that. So we are stepping it back, putting a one-story feature close to the property line and pitching the roof. Okay, next slide. Okay, so these are the plans. I guess if you could blow it up a little, Claire. So on the right side is the underground parking. We have 8 spaces, more than required by zoning, but exactly what you would need for 4 units. You know, it's still possible that we're talking about 3 or 4, but we have 8 parking spaces. You have to have 2 parking spaces per unit, but that is more than zoning requires, which is kind of unusual. Each condo owner walks into their private vestibule in the garage that has a lift and a stair. So that's what the vestibule is, and each one has a storage off their vestibule. Then if you can go over to the first floor, that vestibule for the open porch along Evanston, which is on the lower side, that's the entrance to the 2 condo units on the first floor. On the Scranton Avenue side, there's a front porch. That is a vestibule aligned with the garage. That is the way the second floor units come in. So they have a front porch, they go in their vestibule, and there's a stair and elevator up to their second floor entry. And that is aligned with the roof decks up on the upper level. Go to the next slide. So those on the left is just a generic second floor without a floor plan, and that would be their entries for the second floor units, and then the second floor would generally be split. Claire, if there's any way to go to that exhibit, the purple exhibit again for the roof plan. Sorry to do that to you. Next one. So this is the roof plan, and again, I will explain this. So this is Lee's house and this is Jean's house. This is one story here. This is a pitched roof back. These are dormers. This ridge is 29.5. This ridge here is 29.5. This ridge here is proposed as 34. The purple represents the portion of the roof that is over 30 feet. But unlike the penthouse in the Altunian building, where you're over 30 feet, it's rectilinear, this is a pitch. So the 34-foot height gets smaller as you get down. Well, it's a pyramid, so it gets wider, but when you go down a foot, you're only at 33, and then you're at 32, and so forth. So we don't consider this a huge ask, and it's certainly a long way from the northern property owners. All right, back to the main presentation. All right, so these are the elevations. There's really not much to talk about here. If there's anything you've got the front elevation on the lower. You can see the daylight plane. We are clipping the gable for the front because that's 34 feet tall, but it's within daylight plane because it's less than 20 feet long. I'm sure most of you guys know how that works. And then the upper one is the Evanston side, and you can see the porches. There's the porches basically in the middle of each one. There's two front doors, so those are front doors and front porches for the condos. In this case, the side elevation, you can see how the garage door is dropped about 2 feet. We think we can take advantage of the grade so that we can minimize the ramp and not have a ugly looking ramp visible on the outside. Next slide. And again, the bottom one shows the single story close to the northern property with a pitched roof going back and some dormers. And then the upper one is what would be looking at the bank building. Next slide. All right, so here are some of the neighbors' concerns. I know I'm doing a lot of talking, and the property values. I suspect there really isn't anybody in this room that thinks $2 million and $2.5 million condos, let alone Altunians build condos for $2.5 to $3.5 million are going to hurt property values in the neighborhood. That has certainly been not a complaint that I've heard from anybody I've talked to. The height. We've talked a lot about the height. Again, we think the 34-foot ask is a very reasonable ask given its location and how we're treating it, and certainly as a precedent-setting piece of business, granting that to Altunian next door seems like it would be a very reasonable request for us. Stories, we do have a third level. It's an attic, so if we built a 34-foot ridge and a house, it's absolutely allowed. We are basically getting up in the attic, putting a little dormer there, and we're walking out to a roof deck. Again, I think it's a very sensitive way, a very residential way to accomplish that. Light and vent. The light and vent is all about the daylight plane, in my opinion, and I'm hopeful that those diagrams demonstrated how, especially on the north side, how sensitive we are to the light and vent issue and how it's not overbearing to the northern neighbors. Privacy, well, the privacy by saving those large evergreens. I mean, all of the privacy across the street, there is not much privacy, but you've got a little bigger gap. So let's just talk about privacy to the north. we are saving those evergreens. The good news is they are evergreens. They're coniferous, so they don't lose their leaves in the winter. So all year long, there's great screening between Gene's house and our proposed building. We're saving those to make Gene happier, and frankly, we're happier, so we don't have to look at the side of our garage. And the way we've sited the building and stepped the building, we think that that helps with privacy as well. Traffic, I've not heard anybody suggest there's a traffic problem. I only bring this up to get all the check marks. Drainage, we fully assume we're gonna have to put a stormwater pipe under the ground in the way everybody else has to do it, probably along the west property line, and it would be sized, it'd be engineered and sized appropriately. Even though the interesting thing here is there is a fair amount of impervious on this site because of the parking lot. Noise, no comments about noise. And precedent setting, I can't answer precedent setting. If Drew says it can be written narrowly enough to not create a precedent, I certainly believe him. Next slide. Okay, this is not a mistake by putting the same slide in here. If you believe the corner lots want to be multifamily, we need a PMD. Okay, so I'm hopeful that that's what you guys focus on, and then some discussion about scale. Next slide. What are we trying to, the conclusions here? Property has been considered, has not been considered an ordinary single family because of the parking, because of the 10-foot setback. It seemed like whoever wrote that code always assumed that this was going to be something other than housing. It's legal and appropriate to pursue a text amendment. You may hear that there's some reason that this isn't allowable. It certainly appears allowable to everything I can tell. Property values and comfortable enjoyment will not be negatively impacted. The massing is complementary to the bank project. We think what we're proposing fits in with the bank building and creates transitional appearance because of the pitched roofs. It does look like a house, albeit a big house. If you support the bank building property, it's hard to imagine arguing that the massing of this is unacceptable, okay? Giving the existing garages, trees, evergreens, and so forth, the neighbors will have a very minimal visual impact. And I'm just about done, so I'm sure you're gonna be happy. What do we want? The desired feedback, should we come back to you in a month or two with a formal application? We'd like you to give us some feedback on that. And then, of course, we do want to talk about bulk and height, but not get it mixed up with the PMD. The PMD is the core first decision. Thank you very much for being patient with me.
Thank you, Mr. Dobbins. Yeah, any comments from the commissioners directly to Mr. Dobbins at this point?
I have a couple questions, Tom.
Sure.
If this project does move forward, I know one of my specific recommendations when we get into the nitty-gritty is that the construction documents for the project specifically notify the contractor, because I'm assuming you would be going out for competitive bids with a project this size, that there's going to be a no-build zone around those evergreen trees back there, because they are very, very important to the neighbor to the north. They're very mature trees. Didn't really have a good concept of how mature they are right before the last meeting. So I would want to have the village require that there be very specific construction requirements for the no-go zone around those trees. That it not just be left willy-nilly up to the contractor, and that if some of those mature trees were to die, and there is one that's further to the south than the others along that line, that there be a provision in the approval documents that the association be required to replant trees that are on the mature size, not 6-foot evergreens that would take 15 or 20 years to grow larger. I was thrilled when I saw the revised drawings in terms of pulling the driveway off the north side, because I do think it provides much better protection. I see that your drawings do indicate 8 parking spaces, and I'm assuming you're pretty confident with that.
Pretty confident, I mean.
Okay,
yeah.
we've never, none of the proposals that have come before us in the last 10 years for this property, nor any of the Opticos proposals come anywhere close to 2 units, 2 parking spaces per unit. They don't, it's a great feature of this project and also of the bank property project. The fact that more than 2 spaces per unit are being provided, because I've always been concerned with the development of this block and any of the proposals that have come before, that we were gonna have closer to 1 space per unit, and then they were gonna rely on on-street parking, which would definitely impact the entire neighborhood, the library, Bluffington's, the whole east end of our business block. So very happy with that. As far as your comment earlier about ComEd, ComEd I know will directionally bore lines, but
money.
you've got to pay for it, or the bank property, or both, if it, but that's,
Yeah.
you know, that's something to look at. If they trench right down the property line, the trees won't make it.
That's right.
So, but that, there's a method for helping to protect those trees, so. And I think that's, I don't have any other real questions other than just a comment that I was just very pleased with the, all of the changes that seem very responsive. I mean, it's
So let me-
obviously still a tough,
Yeah, so let me
Call.
respond to that. So very likely, we will not send it out to competitive bids. We will negotiate with some friend of ours, of many, we have many choices. So we're going to be able to control the quality of that. We will protect those trees as much as we humanly can. We, you know, it was kind of assumed at the last meeting that those trees were only to Gene's benefit. Those evergreens are to our benefit too. It's providing screening, frankly, both ways. So we want to save those evergreens. Now, I'm going to tell you, we are building, as proposed, 20 feet from the property line. So there's probably one of those evergreens that might have to go, and they will probably need to be pruned and trimmed. But we want to save those as much as you described somebody wanting to. So we will try. And I'm sure there's some sort of language that can be created if something bad happens to plant back the best we can. In terms of the parking, you notice these are hand drawings. We've been reluctant to go at this full bore until we frankly get some answers. I mean, that's only reasonable, right? If we can't get a PMD, there's no reason to invest tons of monies in details drawing. I'm pretty confident we can get 8 parking spaces down there. The dimensions all work, but we got some detail to work out. There is no question about it.
Thank you, Member Russell.
I'll just echo a little bit about what George mentioned. I think your revisions addressed all of our concerns, really, from the previous meeting. I think they address many, if not all, of the concerns of the neighbors. So, you know, I think that we're on the right track. I've got some other comments that I'll save for after public comment, but I think, yeah, I think it's a good set of revisions.
Thank you, Member Toll. Member Fisher?
I just have one question in terms of the garage. So you do think that you can be coming in pretty much at grade and then do your drop down once you're inside?
Yes, that's our goal. I mean, I'm dealing with a survey that we didn't pay for, that's got topographical information, but there is no reason to believe that we can't get close to that. The issue is really, we are fully committed to getting the ramp inside the building. We are not big fans of ramps going down to underground parking that frankly you see around town. That's just unattractive. I don't think the neighbors would like it anywhere. So we are hopeful that we can pitch from the garage door backwards to the street, which is normal. And the issue is the ramp inside. I'm very confident that the parking spaces will be fine. I'm a little less confident on the angle of the ramp and how much first floor we have to hold back to get the clearance and stuff. I mean, I've calculated it all, but you know, they're hand drawings. So we got some work to do there, but I'm pretty confident that conceptually it'll work.
Because the first floor is pretty much at grade, so you're.
Yeah, and if you look at the drawings, you don't have to. The first floor in that corner is missing on the inside because you have to get the head clearance for the ramp to go down. Altunian's building has the ramp on the outside, and I'm not criticizing, but it's visual. And if you look at their first floor is held back because you got to get the head clearance to get down the ramp.
Right, and the idea is that you can have two cars going, one
Yes.
in, one out at the same
Yeah, I mean, it's not high-speed traffic, of course, but
Right.
we've got an 18-foot wide door. I mean, we'll make that work, yeah, for sure.
Okay, all right, that was my main question then, at this point.
I have no additional questions at this time.
No, I appreciate the fact that you did address virtually all of the concerns or questions that we raised during the first go-around a month ago. I think one general concern tonight is we're down 2 commissioners. And we like to have feedback from all 7, obviously, especially on critical issues. But a lot of progress has been made. With respect, Mr. Dobbins, to the 34-foot, the chimney region, and it might be just my own misperception, any way to drop that down a little bit, or is it really not feasible?
Sure, I could drop it down and make it flat. Because, so the elevator overrun is 8'5", more information than you want. So it is all driven by the elevator getting up to the roof deck. And again, this is not a huge hardship. There are way more important hardships, but that is why we've created it. So I've exactly centered that elevator under the ridge. So I get the maximum height with still a residential solution, a pitched roof. So if we want to keep the elevator, instead of that last little piece of triangle, I could make it flat and it'd probably be 32 feet. But it would be ugly, frankly.
Right.
I don't think that would be a hard convince of anybody that that's a good 2 extra feet. Now, could we get rid of the elevator and just have a stair up there? Yes, but that's less desirable to the person who's interested, of course. Could we get rid of the entire roof deck? We could, but that's probably a non-starter. But there are options. But I think the 34 feet, because where it's located, so close to Scranton, the fact that you granted a 35-foot variance to the building that's going to be next door, and a single-family residence could be 34 anyway, I don't think that's a big ask.
Okay, no, appreciate those comments, and it's just a perceptual thing right now. And as you know, I'm not an architect, and
I'm happy to give you an answer.
thank you. Maybe we'll switch over now and ask for any comment from the public, and Mr. Dobbins will stay here.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lee Neisted.
Yeah, I think just before you get going, Mr. Nice said, why don't we limit the comments to 5 minutes?
That- yeah,
I mean, I think you've made quite a paper record already, but
Well, is there a chance that we could get this slide up, please? Claire, thanks so much. As I said, my name is Lee Neisted. I was part of the No 3-on-3 group. Actually, it was almost 15 years. And we were very successful stopping 3 projects that had come in to try to do projects on this block. Dating back to 2016, when the Trombleys bought this lot, which are the 2, actually it's 1 lot, but there are 2 lots to the right. He bought this lot knowing that the 3 lots to the left are CBD, Central Business District lots. Okay, that's where the Altunian Whitmer building is going to be built. Actually, it is approved. It has been approved. It did both amendments with the village board this last week. That's a beautiful building. I'm very proud that we were part and instrumental in keeping the height at 2 stories. It's not a 3rd story. He's got a bump up in the middle, access to the roof. So there's roof balconies, basically. My biggest concern, and Mr. Dobbins did a beautiful job. It's a gorgeous building. There's no question about it. I just don't think, and I'm going to give you the reasons why, that this particular building can't be built on this particular lot. And number one, he's asking for a PMD, okay? note the square footage of their lot. It's 14,250 square feet, right? The PMD in this village, and my counsel will help me, but, you know, I don't know all these details. The PMD in this village requires a half acre, which is 21,800 square feet. So at 14,250 square feet, he doesn't even come close to qualifying for the PMD, which they want in order to pursue this project. I mean, that to me is one of the number one issues that I have. The second major issue is that this is a single-family lot. It's been a single-family lot for at least 10 years now. Everyone knows it. It's got a green section. The Planning Commission in 2016 put it up as that, and they specifically called it that, an R4 lot. So he wants zoning relief from R4 to R5 or multifamily, but he also wants a PMD relief, which is off the charts, 35 or 40% relief to get a PMD, which if you do that, I could buy Kevin Considine's lot right next to me. His lot's the same exact size. I could come here and say, well, you did it for him. I'm going to do a PMD, and I'm going to build eight condos right beside me, right? I mean, Kevin Considine is right behind this property. It's the same deal. Now, there's 8 other properties in Lake Bluff that are 2 lots, 110-foot lots, single-family dwellings. How are we going to differentiate down the road who gets what? Because both of these structures I knew about when I bought my property, but I knew the CMD was potentially going to be a building other than the bank. Never in my wildest dreams would I have believed that there would be a board in this town that could turn my backyard lots behind me from single family to multifamily. And guess what? If it's a single family lot, guess what the zoning allows for? 4,200 square foot house, right? 4,200 square foot house. That's about the size of my house. He has a building that's going to be 12,000 square feet. So he's asking for a variance not only to go to a PMD, but he's asking for 300% more density than it would be allowed if this remained as a single-family lot. So we've got 2 issues here that are off the charts, according to my attorney, off the charts crazy for any board to even look at this and say, oh, this is a gorgeous building. Well, it is a gorgeous building. It would be beautiful over in Stonebridge. It'd be beautiful over in some other area that the village has set aside for multifamily, but not behind Gene and Lee's single-family million-dollar homes that we bought and have, you know, improved on, knowing that we have R4 zoning right behind us. Now you're saying, oh, R4, forget it. We're going to do a PMD. Well, how do you do a PMD without breaking all of your own rules? Because the PMD requires 22,000 square feet. He has 14,000 square feet. He's a third less. This isn't a close call. It's not like, oh, it's a sliver and we granted him the variance. No, this is like off the charts variance breaking. So, and again, he referred to this petition that they started this last few days. And God bless him, I love petitions. But I love petitions that actually tell the truth. And here's the problem I have. The petition said a 2-story multifamily house, building, whatever, a 2-story multifamily home on this lot. And everyone in the town's going, oh yeah, absolutely, sign me up. The problem is they referred to it as a 2-story multifamily building, and they didn't bring up any of these details. The details that are most often required in order to even get to an application stage. So I know Mr. Dobbins, he's a good guy, he's a great architect, this is a fabulous building, beautiful building. It just doesn't belong on this lot, ladies and gentlemen, and legally, I don't believe that I don't believe that this will end up on this lot. That's my personal opinion. So I have these things, the zoning change, the density of the project, the size of the lot, and please don't tell me about hardship. I mean, they have known about this lot since the time they bought it. Mr. Trombley and Mr. Whitmer were going to cut a deal. Remember, they were going to do a building together, and that didn't work. So the CBD is now the multi-housing development on Block 3, which was originally designed by this village. The CBD is over. It's done. You can't put a PMD next to a CBD unless you have agreements between the parties. They're no longer agreeing. The CBD is over. That building is going to start breaking ground, and I was over there. They're going to break ground in March. It's already been approved. It's done. This is a whole different animal. And I know you asked me to stay at 5 minutes, and I'm going to try to get as close as I can to 5 minutes. But please, don't make us have to go to court on this. This would be just ridiculous. It's over the top, and I just can't imagine it. So thank you.
No, thank you. And if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
I am Jean Nemi Mills. I live at 580 Evanston. I'll be very quick because I agree with everything that Lee just brought up. But I do want to remind the board that of the no 3-on-3, Lee mentioned 10, 15 years ago, literally we just dealt with this back in, I can't keep track of time, but it was 5-something years ago when we had a bunch of proposals come in. And we too had over 500 people sign a petition. I will tell you, Mr. Dobbins has said he's talked to our neighbors to the east. I too have talked to my neighbors to the east. They did not know about the driveway that you want to put in right on Evanston, and they did not know that it's 30 feet, that it would be 3 stories. That has not been clear from the Trombleys or the Dobbins when they're out in town. Their petition, which Lee mentioned, so I won't hang on it, says support 2-story. Mr. Dobbins just said multiple times tonight, no bones about it, it's 3 stories. So if we need to go out and do another petition on our end, we can, but we had over 500 at one point that did not want 3 stories, and I guarantee you some of the people that signed this time did not understand that that's what this is. I personally, from a personal perspective, am just confused in terms of what my rights are as a community member and a homeowner. My understanding through this process that I went through the first time was to look at your planning documents, to look at everything that you have since 1996 on the website. Nowhere in any of those documents does it ever call out Block 3 for multifamily. Now, I did see something Mr. Dobbins put up tonight where it was written in black, multifamily. I can't find that on the website. Maybe I'm wrong. If someone can point that out to me, maybe Drew can send it to me. I've not seen it. And so all of the decisions I've made to invest in my house have come from your documents, from the village's documents that I'm supposed to refer to. Not only was it supposed to stay green space, it was supposed to be single family just on where the parking lot is right now. So as Lee said, never in my wildest dreams, when I went and invested another $1 million just this last 2 years in my house, did I think that would happen, particularly because we just did this a few years ago, and the community voted and the board voted that we don't want 3 stories on this piece of property. So I guess my biggest frustration now is I just sort of feel like the game is being changed on me. I have heard many of you say multifamily is what you want on this block. But again, in your planning documents, this block is never called out as multifamily. You have the area over to the south of the golf course. You have the idea of if the property next to the library is ever sold, that could be, but never on this side. And also, again, I'd just like to reiterate, I'd like to hear clarity about the PMD tonight, because I can't understand how you guys could offer that up when I have to follow what you guys have on there. Why don't they? And this does affect my property and my equity. Let me just quickly make sure, because I had a whole bunch of notes that I'm not going to say anymore because Lee covered them, but I want to make sure I get in all of this. I guess the last thing that I wanted to mention was just the fact that Mr. Dobbins said we're supporting the bank property. We are, as we're trying to be good citizens of Lake Bluff. When we went through this last time with the community and the board, we had said, look, we're not against it. It just has to stay within zoning. And they were able to do that with some relief in the CBD. The problem the original time was that the whole property was then bleeding into what was considered the transitional area by the village and residential. And so, yes, as good citizens and knowing the bank has been an eyesore and no one's been able to come to terms or been able to come up with a project that would make money, great, let's get rid of that bank. It does help with multifamily. I don't think there's a need now to continue that for just 8 more units, when it does cause such a hardship on some of the surrounding homeowners. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michael Kopsick. I live at 398 Ravine Avenue. Lived there for about 5 years, and I grew up in Lake Bluff, so been a resident for over 25 years combined. Just wanted to kind of give a general opinion. I'm an uninterested party, certainly not living or near the area, not a neighbor directly, but close enough. I own a business and I have an office in the business district at 10 East Scranton, so certainly pass by the property every single day, and would like to share some general opinions. I don't want to get lost in the technicalities per se. I am an attorney, but I'm a personal injury attorney, so I don't want to pretend that I know much about zoning. But I have gotten into the materials, not only the packet of information, the comprehensive plan, things of that nature. I've also, I'm 35 years old, so I look at the Facebook posts and the groups online and a lot of the rhetoric that is now surrounding this whole issue. I want to first and foremost express my support for Mr. Dobbins' project. I think just given the presentation, not even including the supporting documents, it was a phenomenal presentation with a clear, decisive decision, so to speak, to conform to the amendments that were requested in the last meeting, conform to the issues and the challenges that this board or commission presented, and to also address the issues of the neighbors and the opposition. And it's clear to me, just with a cursory view of what's going on as a neighbor and just an interested attorney and interested citizen, that there's 2 groups of people who are conflicted here. One group is a group of self-interested, self-motivated people who's, frankly, this is happening in their backyard. And then there's a whole other group, I would venture to say, a much larger group of citizens of Lake Bluff who are in support of not only something happening, but specifically Mr. Dobbins' project happening. It was just said on the last comment that, of course, it's been 12 or 15 years with kind of essentially nothing going on. Northern Trust to PNC, PNC to nothing, restaurants being proposed, multifamily units being proposed, and still we're here almost in 2025 with nothing done. So what Mr. Dobbins has proposed is a clear and concise plan with obvious issues, as there are with any zoning problem or zoning project, I should say, but with solutions to those problems that are well-defined and well laid out. What also boggles my mind is how the opposition could support the project to the west that by all intents and purposes is in a lot of ways worse with respect to the daylight plane, with respect to the height, 35 feet versus 34 feet, with respect to the overall appearance. And we have to try to figure out and wrap our minds around why the opposition could support one building and not the other when there's far more similarities than differences. So again, I go back to who is interested and motivated by self-interest and who's interested in the greater good of the village. And that's why we're all here, and that's why you guys are here, obviously. So touching on some of the opposition and what I see on the internet, and I don't know to what extent, I know you see letters contained in the documents and the packet. I don't know to what extent you all see what's posted online, but that's what the interested citizens look at, including myself. And some of the opposition spreads misinformation just like they're claiming Mr. Dobbins does, which I completely disagree with that contention. And there's posts on Facebook from Mr. Neistat about Mr. Altunian's building being 2 stories and how it's this phenomenal structure and how it doesn't go above the 30-foot height requirement, which is not true. And Mr. Dobbins proved that today. So if we're going to at least analyze what information is out there in petitions and on the internet, let's make sure we know that there appears to be misinformation being spread on the other side. There also appears to be at least veiled threats of a lawsuit, which to me is not productive. Multiple comments, not just tonight, about the retention of counsel and how this is never going to happen. And to me, that's, as an attorney, that's a veiled threat. And I don't find that appropriate, certainly not for a forum like this. And I wanted to express, as a concerned citizen, my displeasure for what I see, at least on the legal side of things. I don't see anything rooted in law or fact, based on what the opposition is saying, that has any real relevance to what we're talking about tonight. What we're talking about tonight is concerns that you have brought up reasonably, and Mr. Dobbins providing support for why those concerns can be easily fixed. I think as a Lake Bluff resident and a big fan of Lake Bluff, we want something to happen, and this appears to be the best option that has come across everybody's desk in the last decade plus. So appreciate the opportunity to speak, and with that, that's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Lemieux.
Can I interrupt you a second? Just, could we clarify this, Mr. Nysted's contention about the PMD before we go any further, that we can't, that with the acreage, with the size, and is that something that we'd have to include in our?
So we would have to see exactly in the amendment what's being requested, but the PMD, first of all, in a general sense, the zoning code can always be amended. An applicant or the village can initiate a text amendment, whether that be for allowing the property itself to be allowed to be a PMD, so making that it would be specific to that specific property and writing it in a way where it wouldn't create precedent, as well as any other modification to the zoning code that the board would find appropriate or that the applicant was requesting. But there are, in the PMD regulations, there is authority to modify the regulation. So again, we'd have to see a formal application, but the text of the zoning code or the zoning map even can be amended as requested in the application. It's hard to say exactly what that would look like without an application in front of us. This is an informal hearing, but no, the property, the general blanket statement that the property could not be a PMD is not legally accurate.
That's what I need to clarify.
Yeah, very good question and excellent response.
And while we're on that too, I also want to clarify the comp plan, because I know there's a lot of discussion about the comp plan as well. I also want to clarify the comp plan is a planning tool. It's a way to evaluate. We're not legally bound by it. It's not the zoning code. It's just, it's a tool that's used. And as is the zoning text amendment or zoning code, a comp plan can also be amended. So if it's not what's envisioned, a comp plan can also be amended, and that's not uncommon. So I also just want to put that out there that we've heard a lot about the comp plan, but we're not strictly bound to follow it. It's just a planning tool, and as this board knows, we are undergoing amendments to the comp plan as we speak. So I also want to make that clear for the record.
Clarify.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Willits. Nicely done. Mr. Lemieux, state your name for the record and address, please.
Okay. My name is Paul Lemieux. I live at 560 Evanston. The north side of my property faces this proposed development. The issue, as Tom laid out for us tonight, was to get approval for multifamily on these lots, and I'm an enthusiastic supporter of multifamily on this block. I didn't like the design of the bank building, but I support the idea of multifamily on this entire block. In particular, I'm very enthusiastic about the development that Mr. Dobbins has proposed. I think it's appropriate. I think it fits. I currently look at a parking lot in the back of Lee's garage. This is, for me, a big improvement. And so I would say, yes, please, in my backyard.
No, thank you very much. Ms. Klitschko.
Becky Klitschko, 131 East Scranton. I agree, and I echo what Jean has to say about the fact that we all were here as neighbors multiple times opposing the 3-on-3. We opposed it for height, opposed it for bulk. There were multiple times much frustration, as I know you all had seen with my side. But as time has marched forward and things have been proposed, I also stand here in frustration. We all agree the bank needs to go. We, I think, pretty much agree that the multifamily that's going in on the bank property is a positive. Mr. Dobbins has come forth with a plan that I think is quaint, fits in with the town character. It gives the breakup of massive brick to something that kind of gives you a breath of fresh air going into the rest of the community. I was approached by Mr. Whitmer to come take a look at one of their buildings on McKinley in September, I believe it was, and due to personal issues on both sides, we didn't get a chance to connect. My frustration comes from the fact that I feel that with the Altunian building that Jean and Lee and whomever else approve, I find the frustration of a cookie cutter Altunian building being put in and it just works into their side. I feel that with what everything Tom and Jason have put in for time, has shown due diligence that I think in the amount of time they've done it should also be taken into consideration for their encouragement and their attempt to make it happy for everybody. I understand where Jean and Lee come from with this being in their backyard and the height. When we were doing the 3-on-3, I kind of had one of the few voices of saying, holy smokes, like, folks, it is my front yard that I will see walls of brick. So in seeing this breakup of building structure, I think is great. I think the thing that I'm most concerned about is the fact that Mr. Dobbins, as Mr. Russell brought up, please see to it that those green trees of evergreen stay and work. My feeling is, I understand your point, but those are Jason's trees. They aren't the city's, they aren't Jean's, they're Jason's. And I understand where Tom is saying we want them just as much as anybody else, but Mr. Russell, you know my background. Stuff happens in construction as best as you can do. I was shocked, Jerry and I were both shocked that our oaks that everybody bought trees or acres from between us and Lemieux survived that close work. And we kept our fingers crossed through all of that 25 years ago. But at night when I lay my head on my pillow, the one thing that I have to say scares me is the fact that this is our second meeting here, and probably 2 weeks before the first meeting we came to, ComEd was already across the street surveying with Altunian and all of their people to do underground. And the thing that terrifies me, and I will use terrifies, is the fact that they were so confident coming before this board and knowing that they were going to get approved, that they could contact ComEd and confidently consider having the underground being done. Now, I'm a layman in this whole world, but it shook my boots to see what was going on. And I'm looking at what Mr. Dobbins and his people are doing, and putting due diligence in to make it work for everybody, aesthetically, bulk-wise, curb cuts. I mean, they are in a position right now that you all say jump, and they say how high. And I came to the last meeting, and I watched Eltunian and Mr. Whitmer walk in, say this is our thing, and it was like there was no question. And that's what bothers me the most, because they never came to us as they have come to us and said, what do you think, how do you work, give us your opinion, on a diligent side that I have seen with their concerns. And so I also find it frustrating that this all is said and that Mr. Nystad can come in and raise the roof, and before he hears any kind of rebuttal is out the door and expects all of you to be nervous about his comments. And that makes me equally as nervous. So, in the spirit of the holidays, I hope we all can have a good time, a little bit of a relief, take a breath, and with the beginning of the new year, we all can be optimistic that this kind of a project is something that would be beneficial to the community.
Thank you, Ms. Klitzman. All right.
206 East Scranton. As I do every time I speak on this matter with you guys, the first thing I'd like to make clear, topic sentence is I want the best for Lake Bluff. I come here, anything we do is from the heart. What Tom presented today is from the heart. And by the way, Tom, that was an amazing presentation. Architectural business, regular business, any presentation in the world, was top notch. So thank you very much for all your time and effort and what you did tonight. That was amazing. So thank you. I guess the biggest points I want to say are there's no option where this is going to be a green vacant lot in the future. It's going to be this multifamily project, which I think we're getting to the point of where a majority of us want to see multifamily in Lake Bluff. I can build, and to do that, we're taking into consideration everybody's opinion and going to make it better. Gene's opinion, Lee's opinion, any neighbor's opinion, we're taking that into account to make that the best we can possibly can to compromise what needs to happen with what will make them comfortable and will not impede on their property. If I were to build a single-family house, which is Plan B, there's no Plan C where this remains a vacant parcel of land. I do not have to take anyone's opinions into consideration. I'll build the code. It's 34 feet high. The setbacks are less restrictive than what we're proposing in this multifamily project. I can build right to whatever the setback number is. That'd be in line with Gene's house, in line with Paul's house. I can build 34 feet on the setback to on the north side. That would maybe impact Gene and Lee's house more so than what Tom has showed up on the board tonight. And the other point I'd like to make is that to ameliorate Gene and Lee's concerns, a multifamily project is commercial and will have more commercial resources to help. Maybe there's more trees, there's bigger trees, there's things we can do to even more protect them and their perception of the impact on their investment than if it were just residential in my house, because I wouldn't have the resources that perhaps a multifamily project might have as well. So we can keep addressing her concerns as much as possible, and it's easier to do so if it's a multifamily commercial project than it would be if it was a single family house. I want the best for Lake Bluff. I want us all to get along and have a Merry Christmas. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone virtually?
So it doesn't look like anybody has sent anything in the chat or has a hand raised at this point.
Further discussion among the commissioners?
I've got a few comments. I'd like to start with some clarification of some of the correspondence in tonight's packet. Not by name, but I was essentially pointed out that so I'll read it from the packet. There's one PCZBA current member that, as a trustee in 2020, voted to keep the 30-foot height restriction on Block 3. Now, if the author of that would have gone to the minutes from that meeting, where I expressed that it may be difficult to work within the 30-foot restriction, I was set on 2 stories, but open to less restrictive height. So I just wanted to make that clear that my position has not changed, that I do want to limit to 2 stories of living space, but the height restriction, I think, was too restrictive at that point, and I continue to believe that. The other comments I have, when we were, as a village board and as this board, we were supportive of a PMD for that entire property, that entire, from Evanston to Oak. We were supportive of a PMD there. We were supportive of a 2-story multifamily there. So now that they're separated, I'm not sure why the village and this board would be opposed to not having a PMD on the eastern portion of that property, or to be opposed to having multifamily on that property. I think they are separate, but there's no reason to treat them separately. I'd also like to say that I'm definitely in support of this proposal, this proposed development. And there's a huge difference between a commercial multifamily and a single family in the input that we can make towards it. A single family development would have no architectural review. Somebody could build the ugliest house at 34 feet that they want, and the village, by right, they would be able to do that. And the village would have nothing to say, no recourse. As a multi-family development, a commercial development, we have so much more control over what happens there. So I would say, if I was a neighbor, would I want green space? Absolutely. But the only way that green space is going to be maintained is if the village buys it, which I don't think the village has an appetite for that. So if I was a neighbor, I would want the most control over what goes there, and I think this multifamily proposed development is how we get it.
Thank you, Mr. Toll.
Yeah,
Mr. Russell?
I had a couple thoughts, which I jotted down and modified a little bit as the meeting went on, but as the village attorney noted, comp plans are developed to provide a general future guidance for a community, and specific comments in a plan do not mean that no changes can ever be made to a plan. If that were the case, no community would ever need to update their comprehensive plan, because the comprehensive plan adopted originally would remain. Planning is an ongoing and continuing process. The first village plan approved by the village's plan commission included a billiard parlor and a bowling alley in what is now Artesian Park, and a large building on the north half of the village green. Over the past decades, there have been several strategic discussions conducted by the village where multifamily development has been envisioned for the entirety of the south half of the block, as has been noted. Ongoing discussions at the Plan Commission concerning the current working update of our plan envision the possibility of multifamily housing on the subject property, as evidenced by the Opticos recommendations, which I thought were way and beyond what I certainly would ever support. But this proposed project is entirely different. With the ongoing approval of the large multifamily dwelling on the westerly portion of Block 3, the bank property, the proposed Dobbins design with the sloping roofs and 20-foot open setbacks to the north and east sides will serve to provide a more adequate transition to the larger building to the west on the bank property and the single-family neighborhoods to the east. The 2 families directly to the south, that would be the Kluchkas and the Lemieux, the family immediately to the southeast, and the family to the east, all with a full view of the proposed project, are in support of the project. That is entirely different than anything we've seen before. And I think that's very important in tipping the balance for me, that the majority of the residents directly adjacent do support the project, and the ones that have the fullest view of it all support it. So that's really what tips the scale. And believe me, I've spent many a night worrying about what's the right thing for this block. I'm thrilled with the changes that were made over the last month. The one curb cut for the project is a tremendous improvement. As we walk downtown, as our children walk downtown, we don't want to have a block that is filled with multi-curb cuts, which may happen if it changed to a different type of multifamily development. So the applicant is here looking for direction, and I would express that I fully support you going forward. Obviously, it's not a formal approval at this point, but I support you.
Thank you, Member Russell. Member Fisher?
Yeah, and I agree with much that George has said in terms of understanding the use of green space in the language that we've had and that kind of thing. I never took it as an edict that a planning principle was stating that it had to be green space there. I didn't take Optimus's proposals for multifamily on the same token. I didn't take them at as if they were just agreed to at that density or anything like that. I think that the revisions have been very, very helpful. I guess I'm just gonna throw something out here that probably is way outside my purview, and I'll just figure that putting things on the table, if indeed the project is still open to conversation among all the parties and trying to resolve in a way, I think it was brought up at the first meeting that some of the neighbors had looked into possibly buying a piece, a portion of the land. If that kind of income could allow for a little bit less density, could allow for a greater protection around the trees or whatever, if it could allow you to increase the buffer, that kind of thing, maybe that's something worth exploring. And I'll just put it out there, and maybe it's too late in the process, but if that is a possibility, and then you put a conservation easement on something, or I don't know what the rules, what the possibilities are, but you do something that would preserve green space even more than they're offering to do or willing to do. I'll just throw that out there. The other thing is, if indeed, I am concerned about a driveway that goes down, and if indeed logistically, when everything gets more finalized, and if it does look like a ramp has to go on the outside of the building, I'd say, is there any value in looking at bringing that in on the west side of the building so that the trees are even more protected and the driveway comes in that way and ramps down? I'm just throwing out those ideas because nothing's in granite yet. So are they is there any value to any of that? And I'm not looking to spend anybody's money, but, we'll just put that out there on the table. But otherwise, in general, my big concern with this has been less the switch to multifamily than the density. I don't, it is a dense project, versus what could be here, and I understand why there's, why the density is there and what the value can be and everything, so that's the piece I struggle with, and I'm just putting that out there that I don't know whether it works for anybody, but I'll just put it out there. So that's where I am, but generally in favor with those kind of things.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher.
Tom, I'd like to commend you. Yes, you came back with the answers that this board was looking for, and there's work to be done, no doubt. My concern, well, first of all, a question. The green space that's already there, the so-called green space, does those plans say it's encroaching? How much on that green space that's there?
So I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. Can you ask me that?
Well, there's the property that's so-called green space on the east side, where the trees are.
Mm-hmm.
That's the green space. That's on the maps. It shows green space.
Claire, could you bring that up? Because there's a nuance to this that is somewhat relevant. The comprehensive plan shows green space, but it didn't quite honor the property line of the lots. So as everybody knows, it's 2 lots. The interior lot is not big enough to be buildable, right? So you can't really just buy the corner lot, keep it green, because then the interior lot is worthless.
I understand that.
Is
I'm
that
just
what you're
curious
asking?
how much green space supposedly will be remaining once you build your
Well, okay, so we are from the property line to the face of the building, depending on which drawing you look at, is either 20 or 21 feet. A normal front yard setback in R4 is 20 feet. Gene and Paul's houses, because of the mathematics, the way you calculate, because their front yards are on their short side, they can be 12 feet from the property line on Evanston. So Gene is, I think, 15 feet or close to that. Paul is in the same thing. The other phenomenon here that helps the subject you're asking about is there's about 5 or 6 feet from the property line to the edge of the sidewalk. That is a little unusual. In most places, the property line's right at the backside of the sidewalk. So the net is from the back of the sidewalk, which is the perceived green space, will be 26, 27 feet.
Okay. So my point being, we will retain green space on this property once all is said and done, and I don't think we're gonna be losing, we may lose the trees, but we're not gonna lose green space. I think your dimensions fit the property quite well. After listening to the discussion here, it just amazes me that people can say, well, you can put this brick wall up on that side of the block, but you can't put a softer wall on this side of the block. And it reminds me of, not in my backyard. And if this project does go forward, I think you've done the best that can be done with the information you have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Member Miller. I guess as we expressed, or as I expressed at the beginning of the meeting tonight, obviously we aren't dealing with a formal petition. It's not a formal hearing, but it's an information or significant informational exchange. And as the other commissioners have mentioned, Mr. Dobbins, you've listened to what our guidance was or our recommendations were last month. You addressed virtually all of those concerns. You've properly addressed such issues as scale, density, height. We can address as a board certain conditions if there is a formal petition and if we are inclined to approve. We're dealing with a transition structure that meets the guidance that the village has promulgated over the last several years. And there are a number of checks and balances that are in place with the PMD if that's the eventual position. So at this stage, I certainly appreciate all the hard work, the accommodations that you made, the innovative moves, and I'm favorably disposed also. I might have mentioned, again, we're down 2 commissioners. I certainly can't speak for any of the commissioners, but we do have to await their personal input also. But any other comments or discussions from the commissioners?
One last question. Assuming that the text amendment to the PMD ordinance is the tool here, where would that language come from? Would we create that, or would that be from the petitioner?
If the petitioner asked for a text amendment, we can certainly work with them to craft it in a way that legally we would support and like.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments tonight, Mr. Dobbins, or?
No, thank you very much. You've been very attentive to my long-winded talk. So thank you.
Well, it's a very, very critical project. Things have moved much more quickly than I would have anticipated after being dormant for many, many years. And we appreciate your hard work and dedication. All right. Agenda item number 7, Ms. Gable.
Yes. So per the current village code, the PCCBA has been authorized and directed to adopt rules of procedure for the conduct of meetings and hearings on matters within its jurisdiction. And as part of the village's endeavor to allow for efficient meetings and follow best practices, the village attorney has provided draft rules of procedure for consideration by the PCZBA. A draft has been provided in the PCZBA's packet. In kind of taking a look at these, one thing I do want to point out is that any of the rules that are shown here that are not mandated by the village's codes or by state law can be waived by the chair. So that is just something to keep in mind in taking a look at these.
So if I may, just to give a brief background that Clara spoke to. So rules of procedure are important for a number of reasons, including due process for meetings to ensure that applicants are afforded all the due process and that there's no question about what's expected, both for anyone that is planning to come and speak at public comment, as well as what's expected of applicants. They also help with effectiveness and efficiency of meetings if you're navigating controversial topics. They help establish decorum and set clear procedures. So ultimately, they can be revised and or added to at your discretion as long as it doesn't interfere with anything that's statutorily required or that is different in the village code. But we just wanted to set these forth. These are standards. This is what we would recommend. So, and with this, it's just a workshop. Based on revisions or discussions tonight, we would come back with final rules for adoption through a resolution. But just wanted to put that out there that they can be revised. It's just a standard that we wanted to start with.
Is this any different than what we've already been doing? As far as you know?
There's some more formality, but no, this is
Basically
generally.
The same.
Now, do we have a vice chair?
Yeah, we didn't talk about that.
Because this calls for that, right?
I don't believe this board has a, is it the, I don't
Have
believe
one.
it. It's normally just established via motion, depending on who's here.
Okay.
For the chair pro
It's not a.
Right, for a chair pro tem, right, it's not a.
Got it.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, just curious.
I had just a couple general comments, because I know we don't want to get into it in detail at this hour, not that I have a lot of comments, but there's numerous references to the secretary doing this and the secretary doing that, which is really different than what people are doing, and I don't really like adopting a set of specific rules and then
Not following.
automatically not following them because we don't do it that way. So that whole term secretary, it's not even defined. I'm assuming it's the secretary of the board, the clerk. So the village doesn't have a secretary per se, so that's something that needs to be cleaned up. We talk about the chair setting the agenda for the meeting. I think the staff probably, for the most part, develops the agenda and then maybe runs it by the chair. So I would like that kind of language cleaned up. There's nothing about, if we do deny something, we normally have a motion to deny, and the necessary vote section doesn't talk about even the ability to make a motion to deny. It only talks about making an affirmative vote, and if the affirmative vote fails, that, and once again, these could be cleaned up, but just for the purpose of adopting a 9-page set of rules, I would like them to be practical rules that we follow and that they're not administratively varied from the get-go. I had a couple other smaller comments, but I can type those up and send them to Clara.
I'll follow with George and just make a general comment. If there is something that is considered best practice that we are not doing, or something that we are doing in our meetings that for whatever reason we shouldn't be doing, then I think we should be open to making a change to what we are doing. So
Absolutely.
if there is something in here, I didn't see anything glaring other than the positions of vice chair and secretary that were already mentioned, but, you know, it seems pretty straightforward of what we do in our meetings and what we do as this board. So, but I think at the same time, we should be just cognizant of, you know, we may not be the end-all be-all in zoning boards. There might be a better way to do things.
Oh, yeah, and then one other thing, section 704 references procedures, in sections 803 and 804, and those don't exist in the draft, so that's,
I'm glad you catch those things, George.
Maybe that's in case we add something completely.
but generally and overall, I'm totally in favor of adopting something like this, just cleaning up the technicalities.
Oh, those were very enlightening comments when I was reading over it. Just scanned it over once. I thought this is a pretty interesting read. We're following most of what's represented here. We just never had anything formalized. So maybe the approach we do is, well, I'll defer to Claire and to Courtney, but maybe take 3 weeks, critically review, submit your comments or our comments, and get a revised draft by next month, Courtney. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's gonna be dramatically revised, but Member Russell and Member told me certainly some very, very enlightening comments already, so.
And one other thing just to add that's not in this draft, that when talking about this initially, we kind of wanted to have in there, and I know Courtney's pulled language for this since, believe today she's pulled language for this, is language around the workshops. So in our current code, certain processes recommend a workshop, but then others don't really talk about the workshops at all. So we asked Courtney to just pull some language for that as well, a draft language regarding that. So kind of what best practices are for holding those. Does it have to be by somebody with contractual interest in the property or an owner? And I think the consensus so far has been yes, that is the case. And so that will be forthcoming as well.
Would it be best, Clara or Courtney, to come up with a minimally revised draft between now and next month, circulate that, and if we're able to have a critical review, then we'll go forward. If not, we can finalize it, I'm sure, by February.
Certainly, yeah.
I mean, whatever's most efficient for all
Yeah.
concerned.
And if there are any revisions right now, go ahead and send them, and we'll make sure to make the changes and get a proposed draft out there, and then that way, that can undergo a critical review if needed. So we'll go ahead and take all the comments from now and that you want to send in.
Well, one thing I think I find really helpful is that little crib sheet that we get on each one, where it tells us that, you know, we're the recommending board, or we're the whatever, and then it gives us option A, B, C, D, because it keeps us legal. You know, when we just kind of read that and say, I recommend, you know, or I propose, we do blah, 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 because I think when we were winging it, it left room for not being legal, you know, in our statements and stuff. So I really like having that kind of language as an option.
Yeah, that's been a nice addition
Yeah.
over the years, or over the past couple of years. Any further discussion on that? I guess we don't really have to continue it, it just reappears.
Yeah, as a workshop.
Yeah. Great. Oh,
You know, I do have one follow-up thought in regards to the rules of procedure, is the Open Meeting Act regulations. I know that before we all come on a board, we have to take the little test and then do what we have to do and say we passed it, and then, or sign a document saying we've read the regulations. And at some point, several years ago, I went back because I wanted to refresh my memory, and the wonderful state of Illinois had completely pulled down the Open Meeting Act regulations for quite a period of time. And you couldn't, there was no way to access the regulations that I could find.
Their
believe
their
the
website
website got
was hacked, and they
Okay, and I haven't gone back in several years, but I was very amused for a long period of
Yes.
time that it was totally down.
Yeah.
It being as an important regulation
Yes.
as it was, and somehow the state couldn't figure out how to bring these regulations up again. But I'm wondering if it might not be a benefit to the commission when we have a discussion on this, that perhaps the village attorney could highlight the Open Meeting Act regulations for us. Because I'm sure that none of us want to violate any of the provisions. And it just would be a good thing for us to be reminded of what the key elements of the Open Meeting Act regulations are in terms of who we can talk to in between meetings, how many can get together and talk, and so on and so forth. And written correspondence, text between members, those type of general things. I would appreciate a refresher. I'm getting old and I forget things.
We do trainings on, we can do we do trainings a lot on OMA refresher, FOIA refresher, but we can certainly put together some key elements just to punch on for Open Meetings Act. Absolutely.
Yeah, summary.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We don't have to get into the.
Yeah, no,
nitty-gritty.
not
For-
the-
You guys
not
are
the
not
long-
newly
not
elected
the whole
officials.
act.
I only say that for my newly elected officials.
I'm so surprised that there isn't a continuing education requirement for it. I mean,
Yeah,
it just
really.
seems like something that should be done periodically.
Right, especially with so many changes. I mean, there's been a few updates to OMA in the past few years. So we can put together just a key points. Yep, for reminder. Mhm.
No, that'd be great.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a good note, George.
George, you're retired, you can get away with stuff, saying stuff like that.
All right, agenda item number 8. Consideration of 2025 PCZBA proposed meeting times.
Nothing's changed from the usual third Wednesday of the month, correct?
Correct.
Okay, then I don't think there's a discussion.
Yeah, I think we're comfortable with that.
Yeah, I do know that my wife has already notified me I will be away next September on the third Wednesday, but so I'll miss a meeting.
Might have to be
But
virtual,
I'm
George.
comfortable with the third Wednesdays.
All right, thank you.
We'll need a motion to adopt the
Oh.
proposed regular meeting dates for 2025.
Is there a motion?
I make a motion that we adopt the regular meeting dates for 2025.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Agenda item number 9, Commissioners' Report. What's on the horizon? Scale?
So we spoke with Tesca today, and it sounds like the draft of the comp plan that I know you guys are requesting to see first will hopefully be to you guys kind of mid to late January, with a goal of discussing it at the February PCZBA meeting once your initial feedback has been received. And with that, assuming that goes to plan, then the possible public hearing for that final draft comp plan would potentially be our March meeting. So that is one thing to keep in mind. And then for next month, it looks like we have one, or if not two, public hearing items. One would be a residential variation, and then we may also see the Altunian project back for the final PMD approval.
Did they have a meeting with the Architectural Board of Review? They did? Was it, can you give us a general flavor of what happened? Did they ask for outside appearance changes? Not the form of the building, but the tone of the brick or the tone of the glass? Or-
I know Drew was at the meeting.
Oh, okay.
I was not at that one. My understanding was that it was recommended for approval, but I don't know if there were any slight changes that were requested.
And does it have to go back to them also during the final go-round?
I would have to look at that.
I believe so. Let me pull up the final PMD.
Yeah, I know it has to come back here and
It'll
back
come
to
back
the
here.
village board, but I'm not sure if it has to go to ABR again.
Yeah, so in section 1015-2, action by ABR, no later than 60 days after the conclusion of the public hearing by the PCCBA concerning the final plan, the ABR will conduct a public meeting for the purpose of conducting a design review concerning the final plan. So it will go back.
Thanks.
Any other discussion among the commissioners? All right. Agenda item number 10, motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Well, thank you very much. Very, very productive night. Have a great holiday season.